Hi everyone. Welcome to the Celebrity Diaries. George Wallace is both fascinating and complex, in a scene where total assets frequently fill in as a shallow proportion of progress. The narrative of Wallace's abundance is nevertheless a simple exterior, veiling the complexities of his single presence past the extravagant features of his manner lies in a story of isolation, desire, and the persistent quest for satisfaction. Go along with me as we set out on an excursion to disentangle the layers of George Wallace's apparently desolate life, where the genuine abundance lies not in material belongings, but rather in the profundities of human experience. George Wallace is an American comic entertainer, essayist, and chief executive who has a total asset of $10 million. Wallace's excursion towards distinction and fortune started in the last part of the 1970s. His comedic ability took off as he exemplified the persona of the right reverend. George Wallace, an imaginary evangelist who enamored crowds with his stand-up act with more than 60 acting credits to his name. Wallace's presence graced the screens of all shapes and sizes, from prominent movies like Batman Everlastingly 1995 to TV series. For example, The Parkers and KC Covert passed the spotlight. Wallace's innovative vision stretched out to coordinating featured by his 2018 parody Exceptional George Wallace, The Vegas Contraband. Significant is his 2004 Extraordinary George Wallace is on top of the world, displaying his comedic ability in full power, notwithstanding his on-screen adventures. Wallace dove into the domain of writing sticking books like Dismiss It, 2013, and Boltwood George Wallace's internet-based ramblings, 20,120. George Wallace's process started in the core of Atlanta, Georgia, on July 21, 1952, where he entered the world as George Henry Wallace brought into the world Mary Lou and George Wallace Sr. He imparted his childhood to a sibling named Napoleon. Family ties, and reached out to the athletic domain as Wallace gladly guaranteed the uncle title to Steve Wallace, known for his football spells with the Kansas City Bosses and San Francisco 49ers. Wallace's early stages saw him exploring the passageways of Linwood Park Secondary School until misfortune struck at the young age of 16 with the death of his mom, confronted with the ebb and stream of life's ins and outs. Wallace graphed another course, finding comfort in Ohio's hug as he set out on an excursion of self-revelation, immediately jumping all over chances where they emerged. He found work with Firestone Tire in an urgent second that pushed him towards higher skies, energized by aspiration and equipped with flexibility. Wallace gained by the organization's educational cost repayment program, setting a deal for the College of Aachen here in the midst of the blessed lobbies of the scholarly community. He submerged himself in the investigation of transportation, publicizing and promoting, and laying the preparation for a future as sweeping and different as the American land. Departure itself, George Wallace left on an excursion that would shape his comedic predetermination just out of school. He wandered into the core of the city to seek out his enthusiasm for satire. Getting some work as a sales rep at a promotional firm, much to his dismay, his way would before long go off in a strange direction. It was through one of his clients that Wallace coincidentally found an open door that would steer his vocation. A satire club was being sent off, and the stage enticed him to jump all over the opportunity. George ventured into the limelight, exchanging his sales rep cap for the charm of stand-up parody. As the shade rose on his presentation execution, George Wallace arose in front of an audience in a minister's robe, initiating himself as the Right Reverend Dr. George Wallace, with his speedy mind and active spontaneity, enraptured crowds all along. His ability grabbed the attention of the Red Fox Show, where he quickly wound up composing improv shows denoting the start of his rising in the parody domain. New York City turned into the pot, where Wallace sharpened his art, offering giggling and kinship to his dear companion Jerry Seinfeld. Together, they explored the dynamic satire scene, fashioning securities that would endure forever. As the tides of chance moved, George Wallace wound up attracted to the charm of the West Coast. In 1978, he bid goodbye to the city that had supported his comedic soul and put his focus on the sun-kissed shores of the West Coast. Settled in the core of West Hollywood, the satire store turned into his second home, a phase where he could wind around his comedic wizardry a large number of evenings, wandering past the limits of the club. George Wallace set out on an excursion that saw him share the spotlight with unbelievable specialists, for example, Donna Summer, Diana Ross, and Smokey Robinson. As an initial demonstration, he filled the hearts of crowds, preparing for chuckling to result sometime before the main events became the overwhelming focus in 1991. HBO's casual sexual encounter exhibited Wallace in his own episode C, catapulting him into the spotlight and establishing his status as a comedic, awe-inspiring phenomenon. Yet even before this achievement, Wallace had proactively transformed TV, gracing the arrangements of famous shows, for example, the M.E.V. Griffin Show, the Mike Douglas Show, and the Alan Thicke Show. Kick off at the Apollo and Late Night with David Letterman, with every appearance, he gave chuckling and pleasure to crowds. The country over procuring a gave tracking with The Way Anyway It Was in 2004 that Wallace's profession took an essential turn as he started featuring a show at the Flamingo Lodging in the stunning city of Las Vegas, this undeniable another section in his incursion as he astonished crowds a large number of evenings with his fast mind and unfathomable energy. The arrival of his parody unique George Wallace, on top of the world, further set his status as a comedic force to be reckoned with, exhibiting and his one-of-a-kind mix of humor and mystique to crowds overall. Yet in the midst of the fabulousness and marvelousness of Las Vegas, misfortune struck in 2007 when Wallace experienced a staggering injury during an exhibition at a confidential party at the Bellagio. Stumbling over free wires, he tumbled off the stage, provoking a fight in court against the Bellagio for carelessness. At last, Wallace was granted $1.3 million, a demonstration of his strength despite difficulty. Resolute by the difficulties he confronted, Wallace kept on radiating brilliantly on the satire circuit, delivering an extraordinary parody. George Wallace, The Vegas Contraband, in 2018, a demonstration of his getting through heritage and unflinching devotion to his art coordinated by Wallace himself. The extraordinary caught the pith of his comedic virtuoso contribution crowds a brief look into the universe of quite possibly parody's most darling figure. George Wallace's comedic ability isn't restricted to the stage alone. He flaunts a surprising acting vocation that traverses many years interspersed by vital exhibitions on screens of all shapes and sizes, from his unassuming starting points to his ritzy collaborative tasks. Wallace's excursion through the universe of acting, which is out and out unprecedented. It was in 1982 that Wallace made his introduction to acting. With his introduction in the movie, Things Are Intense All Over, denoting the start of a multi-layered vocation that would see him make a permanent imprint on media outlets all through the 80s. He showed up on TV Visitor featuring on The Dom DeLuise Show in 1987 and gracing the cinema in movies, for example, Zinger 1988 and Burt Rigby, You're a Blockhead. 1989, the 90s introduced another period of chance for Wallace, as he exhibited his acting skills in an assorted exhibit of jobs, from depicting the chairman in Batman Perpetually 1995 to Visitor featuring on Dearest Network Show. Like Intensity of the Night 1994, The New Ruler of Bel-Air 1995, and Seinfeld 1996. Wallace's presence, enlightened aided screens, enormous and little similar. His gifts weren't restricted to surprisingly realistic alone. In 1996, Wallace loaned his voice to the enlivened series Seabear and Jamal, rejuvenating the personality of Hawthorne Wingo for Fox Kids crowds. In 1993, he took on the lead job in the CBS sitcom Tall Expectations, enthralling crowds with his comedic timing and irresistible appeal as the new 1,000 years unfolded. Wallace kept on dazzling crowds with his on-screen presence, offering the screen to satire heavyweights like Adam Sandler in movies, for example, Little Nicky 2000, Mr. Deeds 2001, and Amusing Individuals 2009. Their joint effort didn't end there as they rejoined for the 2020 movie Huey Halloween, enchanting crowds by and by with their comedic science. All through the 2000s, Wallace's star kept on ascending as he made Paramount Visitor appearances on well-known TV programs like Scores 2007 and Tyler Perry Rise Place of Agony 2007, exhibiting his adaptability as an entertainer. His filmography extended to remember jobs for undertakings. For example, The Coen Siblings, The Lady Killers 2004, where he depicted Sheriff Weiner close by Tom Hanks, further hardening his standing as an Imposing presence on the cinema from sitcoms to vivified series, George Wallace has easily progressed between jobs, making a permanent imprint on each task he contacts. With every exhibition, he reaffirms his status as a genuine symbol of satire, spellbinding crowds with his vast ability and irresistible enthusiasm as he keeps on gracing both the stage and screen with his presence. George Wallace's heritage as an entertainer stays, however persevering, as it could be wonderful. With such an excess of progress that George Wallace has accomplished, we see that he likewise possesses numerous very important resources. The primary thing to discuss is a land house in Sandy Springs. Georgia settled in Sandy Springs. The sumptuous bequest having a place with comic George Wallace offers a top into rich residing evaluated at $2.4 million. This stunning home fills in as the flow habitation for Wallace, and his family welcomes an investigation into its luxurious insides and rambling grounds, spanning 12,000 square feet. Thanks for watching this video.